So my name is Hankel. I'm going to talk to you today about setting goals for research in life. How many of you are postdocs? Okay, the majority of you. How many of you, I know there's some graduate students here. Who are graduate students? Raise them high. Don't be shy. All right. Any undergraduate students? Any faculty members? Mostly postdocs. Okay, great. I'm not going to be solving any of these equations, although I do feel like I'm in Good Will Hunting right now. All right, today I'm going to talk to you first about sheep. How many of you have seen a sheep before in real life? What? I was not expecting that. Everybody in this room's seen a sheep. Okay, in life have seen a sheep. Who's touched a sheep, like been out there on a farm? What? All right, so I can probably skip this story. In between my sophomore and junior years of colleges, I worked on a sheep farm. All right, so I don't know. I guess if you've seen a sheep, you've been on a farm. Have any of you actually worked as a farm hand, worked on a farm? Okay, this is making more sense, but a couple of you. All right, so this was me, let's say. And once a year, when you worked on a sheep farm, you had to shear the sheep. Right? Got hot, you shear the sheep. It's used to make wool coats. And to do this, you had to get them all the sheep into this big triangular fence. And you might think that getting 100 head of sheep into this big fence was hard, but it was really easy. So all you would do is I would grab 2 or 3 other farm hands, go out to the pasture where the sheep were. We'd get a couple of big sticks, walk behind the sheep, get in between them and this gate here, and then we just lightly tap the sticks together. The sheep would freak out, because sheep are afraid of everything. They'd freak out and take off running in the opposite direction. And it was the same every time. The first sheep would hear the noise, get freaked out, take off, complete herd mentality. They'd all run 100 miles per hour, and they would just run right into the big gate for us. All right, so we'd close the gate here. They'd run into the big fence. We'd close the gate of the fence, and they'd all bunch up in this corner, away from the big scary shearer. This is the shearer, the Jason mask. All right, so how do we get them the rest of the way? We would just hold out little treats, like carrots, and the sheep, one at a time, would go really slow towards the carrot. They're not that smart. And once we got them cornered here, once they were stuck, we'd push them through this little gate, and they'd get sheared one at a time. All right, so that's the only thing that sheep responded to: carrots and sticks. Right, sticks being banged behind them, things they were afraid of, and then carrots that are being held out in front of them. All right, but it's not just sheep that respond to these two things. It's also human beings. Also, sometimes some of us can get stuck because we've been chasing carrots or running away from sticks. All right, you guys get the story now? So let me give you a practical example of what sticks might be. Maybe sticks might be not living up to other people's expectations. Sticks might be getting in trouble from your boss or your PI or someone who has authority over you. All right, so when you're running away from these things, you're approaching things in a very tactical nature. What's an example of carrots? Carrots could be your next certification. It could have been your PhD degree. Things that you're chasing where you're just looking, maybe a few months or a few years ahead of you instead of far off into the distance of something you've chosen yourself. All right, so who can tell me what it means to be a tactician? Because this is called of science and strategy. What does it mean to be a tactician? What does it mean to be a tactician?
You're tactical?
You're tactical. What does that mean?
You have a plan? Short-term goals.
Short-term goals. Like you're short-sighted in a sense. If you're a tactician, you're only really concerned about putting out fires, right? And that's what I mean by chasing carrots. And again, those carrots might be your next certification or whatever that next little shiny object is ahead of you. Good job. Don't worry. All right, that's what I mean by being a tactician. What does it mean to be a strategist? It's different. It's the opposite of being a tactician. Long-term goals, right? So being a strategist means having more of a long-term mindset. It might seem simple, but the simpler it is, the more important it is, right? So being able to see things far away, defining your own endpoint, that's what it means to be a strategist. That's different than being tactical. The problem with being a tactician is you can end up stuck, like the sheep. If you're just running away from sticks or chasing carrots, you can end up stuck, whether this is stuck on a dead-end career path or stuck somewhere else in your life. It's not a fun place to be. I don't know if any of you feel like you're stuck right now, or if you've ever felt stuck, but it really can be one of the worst feelings in the world. You don't know where you're going to go next. You don't know what your options are. You don't know how to get there. But the good news is, if you feel stuck, or if you get stuck in the future, you can always get unstuck by thinking like a strategist. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. So why do we care about any of this? All right? I'm not just here to talk about sheep. I'm going to give you some actual data, some actual real numbers, and we're going to talk about some serious things. And if you have any questions at any time, go ahead and raise your hand, jump in. So the problem, it's not looking very good, at least from the traditional viewpoint, for people with advanced degrees. Less than 30% of PhD faculty members get tenured now. That's if you even have a PhD. So once you have your PhD, your chance of getting tenure is less than 30% right now. It's not looking good for MBA graduates. Less than 50% of MBAs now get jobs at big consulting firms, big investment banks. MDs have greater than $200,000 of debt. Malpractice insurance is sky high. There's a lot of changes going on in the healthcare industry. It's not a good place to be either. And less than 60% of JDs, people who get law degrees, actually need a job, actually can get a job that requires a state bar exam. All right? Mostly PhDs here, mostly postdocs, I'm guessing. How many of you were working in an engineering lab? Okay, half of you, makes sense. How many of you are working in a biology lab or different? The other half? Any chemistry here? Physics? Oh, we got a bunch of people. Okay, great. But you're all PhDs, right? So we'll zero in on PhDs here. I saw this online and I just had to put it in there. It's funny, but it's important to focus on. It's a strong pain point. And so we can either keep going down the path that we've been going down and get stuck like the sheep, or we can zoom out a little bit and look at where the industry is and start to look at some other options, or start to define where we want to go instead of letting the industry define where we should go. So I already told you this statistic, less than 30% of people who have PhDs get tenured positions. That is staggering. This is down from 42% in 1995, 70% in 1975. So there's a trend, and it's going down. 100,000 PhDs were granted between the years of 2005 and 2009, as an example. 100,000. During that same time, only 16,000 new professorships were created. Who can do the quick math? So 84,000 PhDs are not going to be able to get those professorships, right? Just during that 4-year time period. So things are a little bit chaotic. I know, you guys thought this was going to be inspirational. Don't worry. I'll give you some solutions here. Things are a little bit chaotic now, but chaos can be a ladder, right? Maybe you've heard that quote before. So things are not what they used to be traditionally. If you had a PhD, you had these advanced degree positions, you were pretty much insured if you kept going down this track, if you kept chasing these carrots, right? Checking these boxes, you were going to end up somewhere you're going to be taken care of. It's not the case anymore. But there are other options, lots of other options. You just have to know how to leverage your degree. You have to know how to think strategically, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. All right, there's 3 strategic levers, and we're going to go through each one of these in order. The first one is purpose. Purpose gives you leverage over yourself, all right? You have to be able to figure out what you want. That's the very, very first step. I work with a lot of PhDs, a lot of postdocs, and they know what they don't want, right? Some of you are nodding your head, but they don't know what they want. So that's the first step. Second, connection. All right, no matter how motivated you are, let's say you know exactly where you want to go, things are going to get in your way. So your connections, your network, gives you leverage over your environment. And then differentiation. Differentiation gives you leverage over that network. So you want to connect, but you also got to separate yourself from the crowd, right? You got to stand out a little bit, whether it's for a job interview or something else you're competing for, another position you're competing for. Does this make sense? Can you guys hear me in the back still? Good? All right. And the final one is action. All right, so you have these levers, you have to pull them, you have to take action. I'll talk about that at the very end. So the first one, purpose. Purpose gives you leverage over yourself. This is a scientific equation at MIT. This is real. I'm going to show you. There's data to back this up. Purpose, I'm serious. Purpose equals hope, stop laughing, equals energy. So has anybody heard of this guy, Kurt Richter? So in the 1950s, Kurt Richter, he graduated from Harvard University, went on to be a professor at Johns Hopkins University. He did a series of experiments that later went on to be called the Hope experiments. And what he did for this is he took rats and he placed them in high-sided buckets of circulating water. Has anybody heard of the Hope experiments? He put them in high-sided buckets of circulating water. Broke them up into 2 different groups. The first group of rats, he put in the high-sided buckets of circulating water, had them swim as long as they could until they gave up and sunk to the bottom. Guess how long the average rat could swim? Go ahead. A few minutes, yeah. 15 minutes was what the average rat could swim. This is why if there's like a flood in London, you see rats everywhere, right? 15 minutes. Second group of rats, same thing, same buckets, put them in high-sided buckets of circulating water, had them swim as long as they could. Right at that 15-minute mark, when they started to sink, he saved them, dried them off, had them rest for a little bit, put them back into the same buckets of circulating water. Guess how long they could swim the second time? 60 hours. 240 times longer than the first group of rats. Why is this? This doesn't make any sense. He didn't pump them full of steroids. He didn't feed them. They didn't have time for their muscles to grow. Yet they could swim 240 times longer. The first rats were drowning and dying. After swimming until they were going to die, took them out, put them back in. They swam that long. His conclusion was that they had hope. A better conclusion is that they were given energy through hope. And you guys can look up these experiments. It's phenomenal. It blew my mind too. Energy through hope. Right? So because the rats knew what it was like to be saved, because they knew what getting pulled out of the bucket was like, they kept swimming for it. So then the more you define what you have in front of you, the more energy you're going to have to achieve it. Let me give you a more practical example. Have any of you ever played a sport? I know it's MIT, but you guys have played sports here? Raise your hand if you played a sport, seriously. All right. So no matter what the sport is, you probably had to do sprints. You probably have to run sprints, right? Shuttle sprints back and forth. You probably, if you've played the kind of sports that I did, you have to run back and forth, you get exhausted, tired, and you're just waiting for your coach to tell you how many you have left, or you're waiting to get to that last one. And then no matter how many you've run, how many sprints you've run before, when your coach yells out, last one, give everything, all of a sudden you have twice as much energy for that sprint than you did for the sprint before. You can always run the last sprint faster. Why is that? You guys are nodding your head. Why is that? It's because what you have in front of you is defined. So again, the more you define what you have in front of you, the more energy you'll have to achieve it. If you don't know where you're going or what you want, it's going to feel like you have one of those weighted vests on and a blindfold. But if you define where you want to go, you actively define it, you can get there, and the more details you define it with, the more energy you're going to have to achieve it. It's science, seriously, just like the rats. The key is to start with the end in mind. So it's, this idea of trickle forward goal setting doesn't work. Chasing these little carrots in front of you doesn't work. You got to start with the end, and then you work backwards to get there. So how do you do this? So what's the process, right? I'm not just going to tell you a bunch of nice stories. I want to tell you a process for getting there. The first step is to create a wish list of actions. That's what I call it. Instead of focusing on job titles, the salary you want to have, the annual salary, you focus on the daily actions that you want to do. All right, so I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Name it and write it. Most people don't give it a name. Naming is power. Naming is very powerful. You have to name what you actually want, right? And then you have to write it down. And writing is very powerful too. I'm going to show you some statistics on that a little later. And then finally ask why. If you don't know why you're doing something, you're not going to be able to get past the first obstacle, let alone the 10 or 11 that are going to come up. Having a strong reason why is more important than the goal itself. If you don't know why you're in grad school, have you really even thought of that? Like, why am I working in a lab? Like, what is that reason? You got to connect strongly with that reason why. All right, so those are the 3 steps. I'm going to go through those right now. All right, so dear Santa, this is just to say that it's like a wish list, right? It's a wish list of actions. When I was in grad school, for me, figured out around year 3 or 4 that I didn't want to be a professor. It wasn't right for me. But I had no idea what I wanted to do. I didn't even know like what other job titles were out there. I just knew professor and then a bunch of other stuff other people did. No idea. So how was I able to figure out what I wanted? I started to focus on the ultimate endpoint, which is your actions. I mean, really, it's your actions and your feelings that you want to wake up every day and have. If you don't want to wake up every day and write grants, you probably, might not have a lot of fun being a professor. just as an example. A lot of people don't think of this, though. So I have a friend in Washington, state of Washington. We'll call him Joe. Joe always wanted to be a pharmacist. Since he was a kid, he wanted to be a pharmacist. He wanted to be some kind of doctor, but pharmacist made sense because they get nice salaries right out of the gate, and they only have to do a one-year internship. Went to high school, really high marks all through high school. Got into a good college, a college that was a feeder for top-level pharmacy programs. Graduated at the top of his class in college. Got into a great pharmacy school, University of Washington Pharmacy School. This is a true story. Got in there, did a great job, graduated again at the top of his class for pharmacy school. Did an internship 1 year. When he was done with his internship, he immediately got a contract for a retailer. It was Walgreens. Some sort of this is going to just piss you off. Some five-figure signing bonus, like $50,000 signing bonus as a pharmacist. Making 6 figures a year. Was happy for about 4 days. He called me within 3 months and he said, I'm miserable. I hate my life. I'm like, well, why do you hate it? You've been working your whole life to be a pharmacist. And he goes, I think it has something to do with the fact that I count pills every day. And I was like, okay, you're an idiot. You mean to tell me you went for 10 years through high school and college and pharmacy school and your internship, and you never thought about the fact that you were going to be waking up every day counting pills? He's like, no, I never really thought about it. I just thought about the job title and how much money I was going to be making. I was going to be a pharmacist, doctor, close enough, and I was going to be making good money every year. And he was absolutely miserable. So what we did was I worked with him. We went back. We really focused on what actions he wanted to wake up and do every day. He really liked teaching. He liked learning, writing. He liked connecting with people. So we ended up working together, and we got him an assistant professorship at the University of Washington. He still works in retail, but he was able to do that, and I was able to fulfill the needs that he had, which is the daily actions that he wanted to do. Right? So this is really important. So think about the daily actions that you want to take. Think about what you want to wake up and do. Like literally make a wish list of actions. For me, when I was in grad school, I made this list. I was like, okay, I want to travel. I don't like being in an office or a lab really, so I want to work from home. I want to connect with other people. I want to stay close to science, but I want to be able to speak on different topics, like more bigger concepts than just focusing on a particular protein or whatever. I mean, that for me is what I wanted to do. And then once I had that wish list of actions, it basically acted like a list of job qualifications or job duties that I was able to match up to different career choices. So that's what I mean by working backwards. You figure out the daily actions first. Those actions are kind of like your job duties. Then you work backwards to give it a name, which could be the job title then. But job titles and annual salaries, they're not the endpoints. Does this make sense for everyone? Okay, if you can name it, you can do it. So this is where I'm going to get a little bit motivational, right? Just because I want to give you a strong anchor of what's possible. Most people, if you've been grinding it out for a long time, you can really get beat down a little bit, and you're like, I don't think I can, make a big change. I think I'm just going to stay here and play it safe. But to name what you really want, you can't be concerned about other people's expectations or your own fears. You have to really think about what you want. Think about those daily actions and give it a name, whatever that name is for you. I love this guy, Felix Baumgartner, jumped from the stratosphere, free fall down, and broke 4 world records. Highest manned balloon flight, highest free fall point, fastest free fall time, and longest free fall distance. Ended up breaking the sound barrier. That's why he had to have this suit on. Really cool. So what I mean by this is anything is possible. Like if you really think about it, whether it's the creation of the internet or eradicating deadly diseases or sending a man to the moon or this, anything really is possible, and you have to get in that mindset. And that's when you can start making your list of daily actions and start giving it a name. And then once you name what you want, you have to write it down. Because writing, this is another scientific equation. I'm going to back up with data, just like last time. Writing is reality. Writing equals reality. All right, so studies have been done at Dominican University in California and at Virginia Tech showing that people who write down their goals are 33% more likely to achieve them. Now, usually when I see stats like this, like I remember in grad school, I think I saw a similar stat, and I was like, this is garbage. You don't rub a magic lamp and write down what you want and poof, it appears. Of course not. You have to take action towards it. But writing what you want down really works because it puts it into your awareness. There's part of your brain called the reticular activating system, specifically the reticular formation. Who's heard of this part of your brain? Anyone? All right, so what this part does is it's responsible for what you focus on and what's in your awareness. Have any of you ever bought a car or noticed a car for the first time that you really liked, and then all of a sudden you started seeing it everywhere? Has this happened to anybody? You guys are nodding your heads, yes. It's not that sales of that car just spiked all of a sudden. It's that it was in your reticular activating system now. It was in your awareness. That specific part called your reticular formation. So when you write down what you want, you put that in your awareness very strongly, and you will start finding ways to get there. You'll start noticing it. So if you're reading a magazine article or you see something on TV and it's related to what you want, you'll perk up subconsciously automatically. So it'll help you find ways to get there. That's why this data has been done over and over again and has been published in peer-reviewed journals, and it's absolutely true. Here's some other stats. 80% of Americans don't have goals. 80% of the people in this country cannot articulate their goals. That means 80% of you in this room, if I came up to you afterwards and I was like, what do you want? Bang, right now, tell me in detail. Wouldn't be able to do it. We all have like kind of hazy generalizations. I want money or more significance or power or publications and money. Did I say money? Right? You have to be able to articulate it. Less than 4% of people write down their goals. That means if you write down your goals, you just put yourself ahead of 96% of the people out there. Less than 1% review them on a daily basis. Whether you put it in your wallet or your purse or whatever, put it up somewhere you can read it at home. If you do that, you put yourself ahead of 99% of the people out there. This is data in the journals. If that's not enough for you, people who write down their goals earn 9 times as much money. That's the difference between making $30,000 a year and $270,000. $250,000. That's the difference. If you don't know where you're going, nothing else you're doing matters. None of the stuff you're doing in the lab or anything, for you personally, as far as where you want to go, matters. It's the very first step, figuring that out. And I know I know, trust me, as a PhD myself, I know it sounds kind of like, mumbo jumbo motivationally, but it's the most important thing, especially now because things are changing so much. And if you just keep chasing carrots and running away from sticks, you're going to get stuck. So that's the first step. Who knows who this guy is? Not as many people as I thought. Come on. Okay, most of you guys know who this is. This is Jim Carrey. One of the most successful as far as the number of movies he's done and how much money he's made from these movies. One of the most successful comedians of all time. Has anybody heard the Jim Carrey story? Great. So this wasn't always the case. So Jim Carrey used to live in his car. When he started out, he was living in Hollywood. First he lived in his car with his family, and then he was living in his car on his own. And he was bussing tables and doing free gigs, free like short stand-up open mics. And he was doing this in his 20s. It was in the 80s. And every night when he'd get done, he would drive up to Mulholland Drive, overlooking the Hollywood Hills, and he would write down his goals and focus on his goals. He was an avid goal setter before bed. But one day he took it a step further, and he decided to include some props. And he wrote himself a check. This is when he was living in his car. He wrote himself a check, post-dated it for 1995, Thanksgiving 1995, made the check out for $10 million for acting services rendered. That's what he put in the memo. Put it on the ceiling of his car. He stared at it every night before he went to bed. Sure enough, about 9.5 years later, in October 1995, he received a check for $10 million for Dumb and Dumber. It's a great story. You should read the rest of it, but it just shows you the power of writing this stuff down and putting it into your awareness. And it's not always easy. It's hard because then you have to hold yourself accountable, right? Especially if you tell other people. But writing it down, it's scientific. It'll put it in your awareness and it'll focus you on it. That's the first step. When I was in grad school and I was stuck, I went beyond writing a check and I actually made an entire board. I actually used pictures, so I didn't just write. I made pictures of all the things I wanted to do. Whether it was just stuff like traveling or climbing a mountain or starting my own businesses, setting up foundations, getting healthier. I was really stuck in grad school. I was having like health problems, everything. I was just miserable. But this was the first step to getting out and to all the different things that I've achieved. And so this really is the most important step. And again, I know it seems a little bit more motivationally, a little less scientific, but there is science behind it, and it is the most important step. And then back it up with a really strong reason why. So just as important as the goal itself is the reason why you're doing it. I love this quote by Nietzsche: "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." So if you know the reason why you're doing something, and again, that's something that's not easy to articulate. We kind of have fuzzy ideas, like we want to have more means, we want to have more resources, more money. But if you really define the reasons that you're driven to do something, you'll be empowered to accomplish it. Why do you think most of these rags to riches stories exist? Because people like Jim Carrey or Oprah Winfrey were poor or sexually abused, or they had these massive pain points, and they had a reason why they never wanted to experience that pain again. And that's what drove them. So set those goals, but back them up with a strong reason why, and it's going to be different for everyone. Does this make sense? Yeah.
How strong does it need to be?
I don't know if I can get that scientific. So her question was, how strong does this reason why need to be? It depends on your goal. If your goal is to be average, then your strength needs to be average as far as how strong your reason why has to be. But if you want to achieve big goals, you've got to turn up the intensity on your reason why. You have to find a really strong reason why. That's why a lot of people end up just doing mediocre things, because they don't want it bad enough. They don't know why they're doing what they're doing. I knew somebody when I gave a talk at Harvard that was a postdoc for almost 30 years. No offense if that's any of you here. But I don't think he had a very strong reason to get out. So if you don't have a strong enough reason to do something else or a strong enough reason to get a job, you're not going to do it, right? You have to want it bad enough. And tapping into that reason why will give you that strength. It'll give you that focus and that energy. Okay, so purpose gives you leverage over yourself. You find that purpose, you work backwards, you're going to be fired up and motivated to get there. You're going to be taken care of. But guess what? People are going to stand against you. Your circumstances are going to get tough. Your environment is going to throw things your way that you have to overcome. So you need to build a strong network. You have to connect with people. This is really important too, because the connection economy has replaced the industrial economy. Has anybody heard this term, the attention economy or the connection economy, right? So all the jobs that are opening up out there, the reason that a lot of these traditional jobs are going away is because the traditional industrial economy is disappearing. And so now we have the connection economy. Why is Facebook worth several $billion? Why was Snapchat, something I don't even know about, it's social media for like high schoolers, was just valued at $2 billion? Why did Yahoo buy Tumblr? If you guys don't know what I'm talking about, these are all just like social media sites like Instagram, Facebook, whatever. Why are they worth billions of dollars? Because they get people's attention and they help people connect. And connection is critical. Right now in Africa, a kid has a cell phone with a more powerful computer on it than the President of the United States had in the 1980s. All you need to be successful now is a good idea and a way to connect it with other people. But if you don't have a good idea, all the resources in the world can't save you. Look at Detroit, for example. All the factories that you could ever want, but no good ideas. No ways to connect the ideas. This is a list based on a Kiplinger report, which is a business forecasting company out of Washington, D.C. 5 of the top 10 hottest jobs in the next 10 years. Sending emails? Are you freaking kidding me? #1 job in the next 10 years? This is a real report. You can look it up. Network engineer, social media manager. People managing Facebook accounts for corporations. Top 5 of the top 10 jobs, all about connections. That's my point here. And this isn't to make you feel like, well, I don't have these skills. Yeah, you can learn these skills. You have much more valuable, harder to get skills. And so if you can add some of these connecting skills on top of your degree, you can be very, very powerful. Because you're very, very in demand. All right, so you guys are already the solutions. That's why I love talking to PhDs and I love talking to scientists. So the McKinsey Global Institute, the largest business consulting firm in the world, you guys can look this up. I would expect nothing less from MIT. By 2018, they said there will not be enough data scientists. All right, so data scientist is like a buzzword. You guys have probably heard this. It just means scientist. I gave this talk at Harvard. This guy flipped out on me. He's like, same thing as a scientist. And I was like, yeah, that's the point I'm making. But it is. So data scientist is just a scientist. How does IBM define a data scientist? People who use all available and relevant data to effectively tell a story that can be easily understood. Sounds a lot like doing research in a lab, going through the data, and writing a paper or a grant proposal. Correct? So you guys have this skill set already. You are highly in demand. You just have to shift your perspective a little bit. So the traditional career paths might be hitting a dead end, but you have the skills that are very valuable. You just have to use them in a different way. How many of you have sent out a resume for a job and never heard back? One brave guy. Yeah, see, one guy raised his hand, then everybody. In grad school, I think I sent out, not to get those 2 graduate students that are probably crying at this point over there, not to get you disheartened, but I sent out probably 100 resumes for different kinds of jobs. Never heard anything back. Black hole. I posted them on Monster. I was like, oh, I'm going to post it on Monster too. I'm going to really get ahead. People are going to, I'm going to fly towards a PhD. Are you kidding? I'm going to be lining up. Wrong, right? You guys know that. I sent them out there, didn't hear back. So why is this? Most large corporations receive over 2,000 resumes a day. I've seen them. 2,000. And do you think human eyes are reading this? Do you think they're employing 1,000 people to go through resumes? No. They use these keyword density scanners. And let's say you're applying for a job like an engineering job. If the word engineering is not on your resume enough, and it's not specifically at the top of the resume enough, it's going right into the trash. Keyword scan, trash. There's 2 piles. Trash, maybe, might be read by human eyes. So resumes aren't really the way to go. And this is a hard concept to understand because a lot of people work really hard on resumes. Maybe you're the type of person that made a targeted resume. So maybe you went above and beyond. You're like, I know I'm going to get the job because I didn't send out my generic resume. I wrote this resume specifically for this position. Doesn't matter. All right? That's not how people are getting jobs anymore. Sure, I might be able to get a job that pays $20,000, $30,000 a year, but if you want to start getting some of the hotter jobs right now and start leveraging your degree, you got to start connecting. I'm going to show you some numbers on this. Referrals. So referrals mean connections. What's a job referral? If I have a friend that works for company XYZ and there's a job opening for a really good position, that friend recommends me to their hiring manager, I skip ahead of everybody. I don't have to do anything. I go right into an interview. Interview goes well, I get the job, and then I go back just as a formality to fill out a resume. That's what a referral is. I've experienced this firsthand. A lot of PhDs I've worked with have experienced this firsthand. It's very nice. And it's the way things are working now more and more. Nobody hires based off of resumes for top-level positions. In fact, 50% of all hires at top firms now are from referrals. It's over 50% now. Why is that? Because it's the #1 source of hiring volume, #1 source of hiring quality, #1 application to hire time. Like I just said, you skip ahead of everything, get hired right away, and you're happier. Statistics show you're happier and your employer's happier when it's a referral versus being hired off of a resume. So if you're not getting out there and meeting people, if you're not going to conferences and meeting people at different businesses or organizations, your odds of getting hired at that business are very low. And not just connecting in person, but there's a lot of things you can do to connect online these days too, beyond just sending your resume. Social media and stuff like that. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Here's the kicker. Only 7% of applicants are referrals. Only 7% are referrals, but they're getting 50% of the jobs. So 93% of the people out there are clicking send on that resume, celebrating, going to happy hour, feeling really good about themselves, and then not hearing anything back. Any questions there? Dead silence.
I have a question actually.
Yeah.
So you said the quality is better when you have a referral, right? But I don't agree with this because you have a lot of qualified people which just don't know someone in its connection and they are just left out there.
Oh, did I say, oh, you mean for source of hiring quality?
Yeah, okay. So the quality of the person, right?
Yeah. Quality of the position filled for the employer. No, I'm absolutely right. I'm not meaning to say that unless you're connecting, you're not valuable. right? Because you might be working in the lab or whatever, but I am saying that connection is the only way to get recognized for how valuable you are.
Okay.
If that makes sense. Does everybody agree with that? Is that reasonable? Okay, so this is, if you had to divide your life up into 3 different circles, work, connection, self. This is how most of your circles would probably look right now, I'm guessing, because I've been there. This is work, you in the lab by yourself, not getting recognized like you should be. Connection, this little speck. And then self, a little bit bigger because maybe you shower and eat your food, take care of yourself a little bit. All right, so what's the problems here? The problem is these circles need to be more balanced, and we got to change the definitions a little bit. All right, so connection is so small because you're defining connection as like hanging out with your friends doing nothing. But what if connection was part of your job? Right, what if you started looking at it as like your way to achieve your goals? Connecting with other people, connecting with like-minded people to make big things happen. So this is more of what I would suggest. Connection really is this important, where it should be as big, if not bigger, than the other circles. But connection is going to include a lot of this. I'm not saying go out and just hang out with your friends and, again, go to happy hour or, be gelling by the pool, like those shoe commercials. Connection is like connecting with like-minded people, again, going back to the journal club example, right? Connecting with like-minded people towards a shared purpose. Connecting with other business professionals, connecting with other scientists, other people with advanced degrees. We'll talk more about how to do this. Self also, because it's not just about connecting and what other people can give you. Like, you have to bring something to the table. You have to be the kind of person other people want to connect with. And I'm going to show you some stats at the end that list the most valuable skills in business. And it's probably not what you think. But you have to work on these skills. I'll tell you right now, number 1 is interpersonal skills. You got to work on these skills. How can you work on interpersonal skills? You can give talks. Maybe you can volunteer to give a talk at a seminar instead of just waiting until your PI forces you to. Interacting with people as much as possible. When you come to events like this, instead of just listening and then leaving, come up and talk to the person presenting afterwards at other seminars. Not necessarily with me, with each other too. Like, don't just bolt out of here and run back up to the lab. Be like, there's people that just took in a lot of the same information, connect with each other. What did you think of this? Set some goals. And then work still, because you're still going to have to do a lot of stuff on your own. I'm not trying to take away from that. Being in a lab, I love working alone too, but it's just part of it. It shouldn't be 97% of it. I love this quote: "You gain more by finding a rich mine and digging it deeper than by flitting from one shallow mine to another." Okay, so when I say connect, I don't mean, get some business cards and hand them out to as many people as possible. You probably see these people at conferences. They're shaking hands and giving out business cards. It's not about the number of business cards you can get, the number of Facebook fans or connections on LinkedIn you can get. It's the quality of these things. All right, does that make sense? Quality matters. If you make a really strong connection with someone that has a similar goal to you, you can do amazing things with that. Look at Apple. That was the result of a collaboration. Most big things are. King, right? So you guys how do you make big things happen? And I know you have tons of other stuff to do, but if you can just start planting little seeds out there and coming back to it every week, keep a spreadsheet if you have to of connections you're trying to make, and just keep coming back to it over and over again. That's how connecting works. And the key is you really have to be sincere about it, because people can sense insincerity a mile away. If you try to make a connection and you start asking for something right away, people put their walls up because they have to, because especially higher level people, they're going to get asked to do stuff all the time by other people. So you have to give and compliment and give and compliment. Plant these little seeds and really establish a relationship, because it's really about building relationships, like lifelong relationships, even in science, even in what you're doing, because it's going to help you get ahead. It's the only way. And I know it's been really hard for me, because I was a scientist. I was like, I'm going to do it myself. I got to be in the lab. I got to get data. I got to make things happen. I don't have time to connect. But since I started forcing myself to connect, 1, it's gotten easier. 2, it's taken me to each new level, just because I've been connecting with those people, right? That your network is your net worth. So it's really important. So I just start approaching it. Just start making it a priority. And again, start small. I have another woman I work with in San Diego. She's in the hospitality industry. She's a high-up executive, but she was trying to work with this big hotel chain. It was one of the Hilton hotel chains. The CEO of that chain had linked up with her on LinkedIn, and he liked to write and post stuff. So he posted an article on LinkedIn. And there's not a lot of activity on LinkedIn. People are still trying to figure it out. It's a little bit different than Facebook. It's more professional. But she gave his article a thumbs up. Was the only person to thumbs up his article. Didn't think anything of it. 2 months later, a high-level position opened up at that guy's hotel chain. He contacted her in a private message on LinkedIn and said, hey, I know you like that article that I wrote. Do you want to go to an interview for this job? That's how these things happen. And I know it's hard to see if you haven't experienced it, so I'm really trying to break it down for you. That's really just the simplest, smallest seeds. And she ended up getting the job. Just like that. Right? Because if you're posting something that you took some time to write online and only one person liked it, you're going to remember that person. So this is what I mean by engaging online. Because you guys have to spend a lot of time in lab, but you can still connect online. There's just a professional way to do it, a right way to do it, and a wrong way to do it. Any questions there? Yeah.
What about learning as much as you can about someone and then trying to talk about that? How do you do that without sounding like a creep?
Good question. I do another series of seminar called Charm School for Nerds, because it's not easy, right? It's not easy to know how to interact in the right way without coming off as creepy or annoying, I would say are the two ones. And so to avoid the annoying thing, just in short, and you should come up to me afterwards, we can talk more. To avoid the annoying thing, you really focus on what you can give and focus on the relationship itself. Because again, people can sense sincerity, especially high-level people can sense insincerity a mile away. So focus on giving, and by that I mean giving them attention, good questions, compliments, and then not to sound creepy. The best way not to sound creepy is to sound really interested and to give space. So you're a creep. If I was to message her every day on Twitter, creep, right? Get away from me, stalker. But if it's once a week or once every 2 weeks, just when you start to forget me, another little seed is planted, that's not very creepy. I'm serious. It's a process that's probably not introduced to a lot of you in science. It was never introduced to me, but this is really how it works. And again, it's got to be sincere. You're not just trying to get something out of this person. You're trying to build a relationship, a long-term. You have to see this person as a colleague. You can't be a fanboy or a fangirl. If you come off as just a fanboy or a fangirl, they're going to keep you at a distance. They might sell stuff to you, but they're going to keep you at a distance. So you come off as a colleague. The best way to do this is to ask really intelligent questions. You know the difference between a really good question and a bad question. You guys have been trained in that. So ask good questions. Know your stuff. Ask a good question. Give distance. That would be my recipe for not being a creep. Does that help? So his question was how not to be a creep, if you guys didn't hear that. All right, so I just made a little pyramid here. Individual connections are the most important. Focus on those, right? Dig deep into those relationships. Mastermind groups or tribes, I have a different mastermind group for everything I'm trying to master. I have a public speaking mastermind group. I have a couple of scientific mastermind group. I still do a lot of stuff in the biotech industry, cell imaging, flow cytometry. I have mastermind groups there. Start getting little groups of people, little 3 or 4 people to get together that think like you and like you. Right? If they don't like you, if they're haters, get away from them. But if they think like you, they empower you, they will have similar goals, work with these people. It'll help you get ahead really fast. When you meet people face-to-face, offline, again, you never know. I think you guys are given little MIT business cards here. Some of you have business cards. Yeah, hand those out. If you're sitting next to somebody on, the train in, talk with them. If they don't look crazy or creepy, talk with them. Give them a card. See what they're doing. If they're heading into town, they're probably doing something similar. It's the highest density of medical professionals in the world here in Boston and Cambridge. And then Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Google. I'll talk more about these now. Differentiation gives you leverage over your network. So you want to connect massively with these people, but you also want to stand out from the crowd. Right? So you want to connect, but you don't want to lose your identity. You don't want to just be seen as another PhD. You want to be seen as unique. So connecting is important, but standing out is just as important. And it's a fine line you have to walk. Define yourself first. If you don't define yourself, somebody else will. And you might not like how they define you. You might be seen as just another PhD, another boring PhD that cannot communicate, another creep, somebody that lacks social skills. I mean, this is for no matter what industry it is, there are going to be biases. So you want to establish who you are first. And a great way to do this is to develop what's called an elevator pitch. Has anybody heard of an elevator pitch? This is great, right? You probably developed elevator pitch just accidentally if you've ever stood at your poster long enough. You developed like a 1-minute pitch to tell somebody so they wouldn't walk away immediately. That's kind of what you're going to do for yourself. And your elevator pitch is going to be what you are, what you want, and what you're about. It could be, and what your work is too. So when you're meeting people, if you have this elevator pitch, it's going to keep you from boring them to death is what's going to happen. So for example, when I was in London and I was meeting those publishers, I noticed a lot of people would go up and talk to these publishers. They would have no idea what to say. These were all people that wanted to publish a book. They have no idea what to say. So the publisher would say, "Oh, so what do you do?" And then they would just start blabbing on and on about what school they went to, what all their interests under the sun were, what their favorite color was, all this stuff. And the publisher's eyes would just glaze over. But the people that were really effective and ended up building relationships with those publishers had like a 5-second sentence that they were able to say right away that grabbed their attention. And you needed to develop that 5-second sentence for yourself too, with as few words as possible. What are you about? What do you do? What do you want? And lead with that. Have you guys heard of burying the lead? You guys have heard this before? So if you write a paper, have you heard of a topic sentence? This is like your topic sentence. So in the newspaper industry, if you bury the lead, like a lot of people will write all their ideas down in a paragraph and then at the very end summarize it in a great sentence. That great sentence at the end needs to be moved to the top. That's your topic sentence. All right, so if you don't do that, you bury it. That's burying the lead. So this is your topic sentence. Your elevator pitch is your topic sentence. Because people don't pay attention anymore. You've noticed this. Nowadays, this is being called the escalator pitch. So you really only have the amount of time that it takes to cross somebody's path on an escalator when they're going up and you're coming down. That's it. That's how much time you have to get their attention. So when you're meeting high-level people, think of the biggest scientist, the biggest name in your field. There's a lot of different fields here. Think of the biggest name. If you got in front of them, what would you say? They don't want to hear you rattle on. Think of what your message would be right away. How would you get their attention so when you walked away, they would remember who you are? Let me give you an example. So another equation, but I'll show you what this means. You want to bring unique things together, right? So creating analogies, bringing unique things together, this will help you make a better escalator pitch. Who's seen this movie? Jaws, right? Biggest blockbuster of the 1970s. Still one of the highest grossing films of all time. Pretty simple storyline, right? So when another movie was about to be produced in the 80s, it was written first. The movie was Alien, right, in the 80s. And they were having trouble selling the movie. They didn't know how to describe it. And they couldn't sell it as a result. Until one of the writers came up with this elevator pitch, the best elevator pitch that there ever has been, ever. Alien, Jaws in space. In 3 words, they took everything that you know about Jaws and everything you know about space and brought it together. Jaws in space. Sold, was one of the highest grossing movies of the 1980s. So it's a movie example, all right? But it's a great example because it's also called a high concept pitch. You can look this up. It's a thing people work very hard on. You bring 2 concepts together. So when you're creating your elevator pitch, or however you want to describe what you do yourself, bring in words that are very conceptual. Bring them together. This stuff matters. Again, we're in the connection attention economy. You're vying for connection. So this is just a very practical example of somebody I worked with who had his master's and he wanted to get a teaching position. He read one of my articles that was how to connect without getting lost in the crowd. Same kind of stuff we've been talking about. And right here he writes, the hiring manager asked me to say a little something about myself. And the backstory was he had 9 interviews prior to this and didn't get any of the jobs, didn't even get a call back. He'd go in there and wait for the interviewer to ask him questions. He'd answer them, blah, blah, blah. But what did he do differently this time? In response to the hiring manager, he said, "I am a natural-born leader with an insatiable work ethic who would be invaluable to your school." Boom. That was the first sentence out of his mouth. So what does that show? It shows he knows exactly who he is, exactly what he's about, and exactly what he's bringing to the table. Interviewers love this in any industry. As a result, 2 weeks later, he was offered the job. He's still working there. Does this make sense for everyone? Any questions here? Okay, you are being Googled. Funny story, wasn't very funny for me, but in college I wrestled and I lost a match, and that match was carried by a Sports Illustrated affiliate, and if you Googled my name for like 5 years, the top hit was, "Isaiah Hankel loses, ... So anytime I went to a job interview or met somebody new and they Googled my name, which I'm sorry has happened to all of you, is happening to everybody all the time, the first thing they saw was basically, "Isaiah Hankel is a loser." Every time I went to an interview. So just so you guys know, if you get an interview or if you meet someone for the first time and there's any kind of connection, they're going to Google your name or look for you on Facebook or whatever else. If you're not controlling the conversation, Google or somebody else is. Or even worse, if there's no conversation about you at all. That's not very inspiring for a hiring manager. So this is a great opportunity, especially nowadays, to control what people see right away, because first impressions do matter. So a great way to do this, how do you change the conversation on Google? You can't be as big as Sports Illustrated right away, but guess what's bigger than Sports Illustrated? LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Google. Their platforms are way bigger. So if you create a professional account, at least on these big four, there's also plenty of others you can create accounts on too, you can control what they're seeing. You get a somewhat professional picture taken. It's like you're creating a brand for yourself. Get that same professional picture on at least these 4 websites. Your elevator pitch, that's your tagline, right? Because they all ask for a tagline of what you're about. Use that same tagline on all 4. Now, if anybody Googles your name, they're going to see your profiles on these 3 massive websites before they see anything else. And they're going to see exactly what you're feeding them. They'll just see your profiles. You get to control the conversation that way. Does this make sense? And you can go further than that. You can also interact. You can start, you don't have to create a blog, but that is an option. You can also start commenting on other people's blogs. Then if people search your name, and if like Science, for example, Science Careers has a blog, let's say you start adding to that conversation, your comments will come up on Google too. People are searching for this, especially higher level people in the industries you're trying to get in. And so what does this do? What does it show? First, it shows initiative. If you're getting out there and you're connecting and you're commenting on things, like you're establishing your credibility in the industry, even just online. Nature has a bunch of websites and blogs and opinion pieces. Start commenting on some of them. Those comments are searchable. They'll come up on Google. You can establish yourself as an authority figure. Put your degree on there, everything. Establish that credibility. People will search it way before they set up an interview with you, way before. Okay, so what have we talked about so far? We're getting close to being done here, about 10 more minutes. Purpose, create a wish list of actions, name it and write it, ask why. Connections, connections give you leverage over your environment. Connection economy, that's what we're in now. That's why it's important to start connecting. Data scientists, you guys are all scientists. You have a valuable skill set that you can leverage. You just have to start connecting and focus on those individual connections. And remember, they can start very small. And then differentiation, elevator pitch, analogy, right? High concept pitch, bring big concepts together in an interesting way, and then control the conversation. So now we're going to talk about action, pulling the levers, because all of this knowledge does not mean anything if you don't start taking action. Who's heard of the marshmallow challenge? Everybody wake up. This is going to blow your mind. A few of you. Okay. So it's kind of like an experiment. You get one big marshmallow. You get 20 pieces of hard spaghetti, pre-cooked. You get a yard or a meter of scotch tape and a meter of string. And the goal is to build the tallest structure possible in, I think, like 8 minutes. And so this is a huge thing that's done worldwide. A lot of different organizations take part in it. They did one that was really big. I think they did it at the Staples Center or something, where they had all different types of groups of people. They had scientists, PhDs, they had clinicians, the top surgeons of the world, high-level business executives, they had just CEOs, they had recent MBA graduates, recent Harvard Business School MBA graduates, was one of them I know, high schoolers, grade schoolers, all the way down to kindergarten. All these different groups competing with each other to build the tallest structure possible. Guess who did the worst? It's not PhDs, don't worry. Guess who did the worst? Harvard MBAs. The recent Harvard MBA grads did the absolute worst. Most of them didn't even finish. They didn't even start, exactly. So you can imagine there was probably, guess who did second worst? The CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. Guess who did the best? Kindergartners. It's wild. You guys can look it up. It's nuts. Kindergartners. So why is that? What happened? So as you can imagine, the Harvard MBAs, the CEOs, there was a lot of posturing, a lot of talking, a lot of discussions. This is right. I published this paper. I know what I'm doing here. And then the buzzer rang. They're probably like in the last 30 seconds, oh, we got to start building this. They tried their first thing. It fell over. Fail. Kindergartners, what did they do? They started playing. They started doing it, taking action. They just started building the structure, fell over 5, 6, 7, 8 times, and really quick, through failing, they figured out what worked and what didn't. And they built a taller structure than any of the other groups. Kindergarten, have you seen kindergartners like, we're like 5 years old? So try to get into that mindset a little bit. Yeah, we're very serious people. We have very serious research to do. But, zoom out a little bit and get creative. How can you leverage what you have, this advanced skill set? Because you guys have very valuable stuff in here. But we got to get it out there. It doesn't do anybody any good if we don't get it out there, start connecting, and start taking action in new ways. All right? So that's what it is about taking action. And don't be afraid of failing, just like the kindergartners. The more you fail, the higher structure you'll build, the higher you'll go. Okay, who's heard of the 10,000-hour law? There's been a lot of books, right? Malcolm Gladwell and Talent is Overrated. It's really cool, the idea that it's about 10,000 hours to master a skill. So what does this mean? I work with a dentist, and his fine motor skills of his hand is really important because you're working in like microns on a tooth, right? If you're trying to fill a tooth or whatever. So he had to work on this for like 10,000 hours to master it. And I started asking him, like, so how do you break this rule? Like, what kind of things? Maybe you can't break it, but maybe you can bend it. So how can you take action in a way that's going to give it the most impact? And that's one of the things I started to really research. And there are kind of 3 things you can do to shave hours off of this rule. And I wanted to go over them. So taking action is important, but you got to take the right kind of action. And we've talked about some of these concepts already. The first one is convergence. You might have 3 or 4 different goals. You make that wish list of actions. You define your endpoint. There might be a few different things. Like for me, a big one's science, a big one's writing, and a big one's speaking. Try to converge your efforts in as many ways as possible. Right? So talk about science, for example. Write about science. Converge these things. Right? Because you can't do 10,000 hours for 3 different subjects, but you can converge them and maybe just do 10,000 hours once. So that's convergence. Synergy. Right? So synergy really works. So for example, I don't know if there's any coders here, any engineers that do a lot of coding, but a lot of companies now, they'll have people code in pairs, right? And somehow the data shows they get more work done in pairs than they do on their own. So every hour that they code in pairs equals more than both of them doing them separately. It's pretty amazing. So that kind of synergy, and it's because you see opportunities, and it involves editing and a bunch of these advanced processes, but that's why I'm really a big advocate of mastermind groups. It's really important. If you want to get higher faster, get into some mastermind groups so your hours count for more. Metamorphosis. We all know this. You stand on the shoulders of giants, right? But you also, it's beyond that. You make their shoulders your own. You can't be afraid to have inspirations from other people and to morph their work into your own. Find your own voice, right? So Mozart, for example. Mozart, he was a case study in some of these books on the 10,000-hour law. And everybody's like, oh, he was born a genius. It wasn't the case. What Mozart did was, for his earliest compositions, he took lines of Johann Sebastian Bach's compositions and used them and then built on top of them. Right, so what I mean by this is don't start at the bottom. Don't think you have to do everything yourself. and you guys know this, you probably write papers, you reference other people, you find other people's work that jives with your own, you meet with these people, you work together. You build on other people's work. I mean, you always give credit to your inspirations and reference and stuff, but one of the best ways to find your own voice is to build on the work of others. Right? You wouldn't go out and buy a Mac from the 1980s and study that if you wanted to get into computer engineering. You'd get the newest computer that came out. Does this make sense? Metamorphosis. Okay, a sub-law of the 10,000-hour law is the 5-hour law. Who's heard of this? Basically, you only have 5 hours in a day to get better at something. Studies have shown, I'm going to talk about my favorite one, studies have shown that you only have the mental energy, the mental capacity, like we actually have a biological limit, that if you were to get better at fencing, anything from fencing to surgery to golfing, to playing the cello, the violin, they can only get better, they can only push past their current bounds for 5 hours during the day. Coding, anything. They've done these studies across the board. 5 hours. And I know this is true for me. When I was in graduate school, the best advice I ever got was from one of my mentors when it was time for me to write my thesis. He said, go to the library first thing in the morning, write for 5 hours, then stop, you're done for the day because everything else is going to be garbage. He was right. I tried writing for like a full day once, I couldn't. You only have about 5 hours, and most people's 5-hour window is in the morning. So whatever's the most important to you should be done in the morning, and again, you only have about 5 hours to do it. That's it. So that gives you kind of a visceral feel of what life comes down to if you want to get great at something. And it's because our willpower gets depleted. Have you guys heard of ego depletion? Willpower depletion? So it's the idea that's backed up with a lot of science, most of it's out of Stanford, that you only have so much mental energy, you only have so much willpower. Willpower is just forcing yourself to do something that you're not naturally inclined to do. The best experiment of this is by Baba Shiv out of Stanford University. Great experiment. He had two groups of people. One group, he had memorize a 2-digit number. The other group had to memorize a 7-digit number. Then he told them to walk down this really long hallway, like a 200-yard hallway, and report the number after memorizing it the whole time to the person at the end of the hallway. But halfway down the hallway was a table with chocolate cake on one side, really bad for you, sugary chocolate cake, or really healthy fruit. The people that had to memorize the 7-digit number chose the chocolate cake twice as often as the people that memorized the 2-digit number. The mental strain of memorizing 5 extra digits made them choose, they did this with all different types of groups of people, made them choose the chocolate cake over the fruit twice as much. They've also done similar studies where they've had to memorize the numbers and then take an IQ test afterwards. The people that had to memorize the 7-digit number did worse on the test because their willpower was drained trying to memorize that number. Not only that, they've done a couple of other variations. One where they had to hold their hand in cold water, ice cold water, which takes willpower. They had like one group do it for, I forget the exact numbers, but for 30 seconds, another group do it for 10 minutes. The group that did it for 10 minutes performed way worse on the test afterwards. Another variation, they had them do a gripping exercise. The more repetitions you did of the gripping exercise, the worse they did on the exam. And then one final one, if any of you have had to make a lot of decisions in one day, like let's say you did more shopping than you care to do, and your brain just turned off afterwards, it's because you only have really what it comes down to is a certain number of decision-making units. So they've had hold up 2 pens. What do you like, blue or a green pen better? What do you like, this shirt or this shirt? What do you like, this color or this color? People that have to make more decisions like that, just simple, doesn't matter decisions, performed worse on the test afterwards. So what I'm telling you this is because you only have a certain amount of mental energy to get better at something every day before your willpower is depleted. Again, it's Baba Shiv at Stanford University. It's really cool stuff. So how can you overcome this? How can you keep yourself from wasting that mental energy? There's only 3 ways to do it. The first is by creating habits. Right, so the part of your brain that stores something as a habit is a really, really small part of your brain. Whereas if you have to make a decision, it activates more of your temporal lobe, right? So when you make a habit, you don't have to make any decisions. It's a habit. You're like running on autopilot. Like when you brush your teeth, you don't have to make a decision to brush your teeth. Most of you, I hope, wake up every morning, brush my teeth. Like it just happens. They've done studies with rats where they've hooked up little monitors to their brains so they can monitor their brain activity when they're put into a new maze. when they're first put into a new maze, their brain activity is off the charts. They're scratching the wall, sniffing, trying to find the cheese at the other end. But as they're put into that maze over and over again, something funny happens. They find the cheese faster, but their brain activity goes way down because they've turned it into a habit. So the more habits you make, and this is why I'm a really big fan of creating morning rituals. The people at the very highest levels of every field, most of them, there's a book on this, have morning rituals. Right? So like I wake up every day and my first 2 to 3 hours a day are the same. I eat the exact same thing for breakfast. I have very few clothing options. I do the same thing every day. And because the best way to create a habit is to stack it on another habit. I don't have a lot of time to go into this, but for example, if your doctor tells you need to start taking a new medication every day, don't say I'm going to take it at 3 p.m. every day. Say I'm going to take it after I brush my teeth. Because that brushing your teeth habit has been there forever. And the more habits you create, the less decisions you're going to have to make, the more of your mental energy you're going to have for getting better and advancing your skill set. So once you figure something, like something's good for you out, once you figure out that something is good for you, turn it into a habit as soon as possible. Take it off of the decision list and save those decision-making units for getting better at your skill set. Another one, automation. Most of you know this. Automate as many processes as possible. You'd be surprised how many different things that there are apps for. Start getting an assistant to do some of your stuff. It might seem silly, you're like, oh, I'm a postdoc, I can't get an assistant. You'd be surprised what high schoolers and college students would work for nowadays. I got my first assistant when I was in graduate school. My last year of grad school, I had doing other stuff. And because there's only so much you can do. You can't scale yourself past a certain point. So just an idea. Virtual assistants, that's another thing you can do. Have any of you guys heard of virtual assistants? Yep. The last one is adjustment. Adjust your environment. So you want to save your decision-making units. This just means surround yourself with the right people and the right environment. A real practical example is if you're trying to lose weight and you have ice cream in the freezer, you have to make a decision not to eat that ice cream every time you pass by the freezer. This will reduce your willpower, right? Takes away those decision-making units. But if there's no ice cream in the freezer, you don't have to make that decision. Make sense? All right, last few slides. 3 most important skills. I hit on these. I want to give you some takeaways now. The first is 3 most important skills, then I'm going to give you a quick action list and we'll be done. A recent study came out reviewing the top 300 Fortune 500 companies, asking what the most important skill set was for all. These are all like biotech, pharmaceutical, does not matter what the company was. All across the fields, number 1 was interpersonal skills. More important than anything you are doing in the lab as far as your success rate in that business, in that industry. Because no matter how great your skill is in the lab, if you can't communicate it to other people, pass it along, rally people behind it, it's not going to build the kind of steam you were hoping for. Interpersonal skills, number 1. Number 2, drive and internal motivation. So really this comes down to everything we're talking about today. Making a decision and taking initiative yourself without being told what to do. Not just chasing carrots, but self-directed action. Number 2 most important skill. Number 3, strategic planning. Also what we're talking about today, right? Being strategists, planning ahead, setting up that endpoint. Where do you want to be 5 to 10 years from now? Defining that in detail. The more details you define it with, the more energy you'll have to achieve it, and then working backwards to get there. Here's the key. These are all easily developed. You guys have done the toughest, the most hardest work, which is working in your lab and developing your specific scientific skill set. Now you just have to add these on top of it. The first step is realizing that these are important. That's actually the hardest step too, just realizing that these are important. Then spend time on them and develop them. So put another way, I wrote an article about the only 3 skills that will matter in 10 years. Same thing, oral communication, right? So a lot of business now is done with oral communication. It's not just writing, but people want to, there's a lot of you've probably seen a lot of online seminars. I think Harvard and MIT both have online classes that are being built up and TED Talks, all this stuff. So speaking in front of people, working on your oral communication skill set. Taking initiative, we just talked about that. If you do what you're told, you'll end up stuck. And then creative decision making, strategic creative decision making. This is one thing that'll never be replaced by computers. They can just follow an algorithm. You can make the creative decisions. All right, action list. Number 1, map out your purpose tonight. Because really nothing else you do in the future doesn't matter unless you figure out where you want to go first. Create 3 professional networking accounts tonight. So if you don't have LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, for example, I'd create those. I'd use the same professional picture for each, and then I would use the same elevator pitch tagline for each as well. Create your elevator pitch. Connect with 5 new people every day. Set a small goal. Even if it's 1 or 2 new people, connect with them, get their information, follow up with them. You know, whether it's following up by linking with them on LinkedIn or Facebook, you know, find some of the higher level people you want to network with and start reaching out to them, start planting those seeds. And then create a morning ritual. Morning ritual will, if you guys, does anybody here have a morning ritual? A couple of you? It's very helpful. It's one of the most important things you can do. All right. You can take that later. So, cheeky scientist. I've built up this network of people with advanced degrees. We have a number of consultants. We train people to be consultants, but we also do consulting. If any of you guys are trying to figure out what other options there are out there, come see me afterwards. Fill out the sheet. We're not going to try to sell you anything. I'll just send you free articles, mostly from my blog, things that'll help people with higher level degrees kind of use those degrees to develop their interpersonal skills and make connections. It's all just about building connections. It's at cheekyscientist.com, and you can ask me any questions you want to. Thank you.
So for an introvert, how could you help yourself make more connections without that being too difficult or too willpower consuming?
Good question. So she mentioned, what's your name? Holly mentioned that, what if you're an introvert? It's not easy making connections, and it will drain you more. It'll take more of your willpower because you're not naturally inclined for that. Great question. Have you read Susan Cain's book? So there's a book called Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a Noisy World. I believe a really good book. I think a lot of us here are probably introverts. Believe it or not, I'm an introvert. I'm going to have to go be alone for like 2 days after this talk. But like seriously, that's why I like to write so much. So anything can be sharpened. And as you get better at anything, it will reduce your threshold. So now it doesn't take as much willpower for me to get up in front of people. When I first started, like getting up in front of people to talk, like even 10 people, was terrifying. It drained me. I couldn't do anything afterwards. Like I was just like spent for the day. But now it doesn't take quite as long. It's much easier. So it's just like anything. If you keep perfecting that skill set, you keep putting in hours towards that skill set, it'll really, really help. And start seeing it as, just knowing yourself too will help. If you know you're going to need a little bit more recuperation time, realize that. So if you go to a conference, network, but give yourself some more alone time to recharge. Go for a walk or something. I often do that. I'll go to a conference, network a bunch. While everybody else is going to lunch, I'm like by myself in my room, come back, and I can start networking again. So knowing yourself, and again, practice getting it in the habit of it, right? So if you get in the habit of speaking to other people, like you can just turn it on automatically, it doesn't reduce your willpower. But it's climbing up that threshold to get there first, and you have to get out of your comfort zone to do it. So just do it a little bit, you know. Do like, I'm gonna connect with 1 person today. Okay, in a week, 2 people every day. So build up. Does that help? Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Holly. Anyone else in the back? Yeah.
What if the first impression goes wrong? Like, we interact with some top-level official and the interaction doesn't go as good. Is it worth investing energy to follow up that interaction in future?
Good question. So his question was, what if your first impression is a disaster? Which I'm sure has happened to all of us, or at least you feel like it. So number 1, it usually is never a disaster. It's usually just in your own head, like, oh, they hate me. And I mean, even if you spill water on them, whatever. The biggest thing is, and I'll use another example of speaking, not that this has ever happened to me. Let's say you're giving a presentation, you spill water all over yourself, the mic, disaster. If you turn it into a big thing and you add more energy into that drama, you're going to make it a disaster. But if you act like it was nothing and you pretend that nothing happened and you just go on and you make a subtle joke about it, it's much easier. So yes, I would continue to invest in that relationship. The only time I would stop investing in a relationship, if somebody's made it clear that they're not into you or they make you feel bad, you know, like I talk about negative people or haters or whatever, don't keep chasing to make that person happy. A lot of us do that in our professional lives too. There might be somebody in the lab or a PI or whatever. We keep chasing that carrot, like we want their validation. Please, that's when I would say, okay, stop spending energy on that. But if you screw up a little bit, that's fine. They probably didn't even notice. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah. Nice scarf. Yeah.
How much of what you said do you think is through worldwide, or is just something that is going on in U.S.?
Good question. So she asked, is this just something that's going on in the U.S.? And no, absolutely not. I mean, if you go anywhere in Europe, Australia, I mean, India, I was just in Asia, everyone's connected online. You can look at these world maps now to see how many people are on Facebook, how many people are on Google, all this stuff. So as far as the connecting, is that what you're asking about, the connections?
Oh, in general, it's about, the attitude that you should show yourself.
It is. So there's different audiences. Like I'll speak to Americans a little bit different than I would speak to the French, or a little bit different than I would speak to Australians, obviously. It's just like your audience is different, but these themes are all the same. Like that was a worldwide study as far as interpersonal skills being the most important. This idea of the connection economy, the numbers of people on Google and Facebook are skyrocketing in every country around the world. So that's important. The numbers of PhD positions are plummeting all around the world too. So all of these major themes are very different. As far as subtle differences between cultures, of course. But does that answer your question? Yeah, thanks. Someone in the back? Don't be shy. Yeah.
It's impressive to see sort of the change you've made after doing the PhD to sort of what you're doing now. Can you speak to sort of the timeline for you or for other people who've made a big change? Does a lot of it occur after the degree? It's sort of, I just recently finished my PhD and I finally feel that I have some mental energy to spend about thinking about what to do next.
Yes. Yeah. Good question. So to be clear, everything I presented on here is the process that I went through. Like the 3 things that were the most important as far as really focusing on my purpose. You saw like my vision board or whatever up there. I created that. I really started to dig into figuring out what I wanted my last year of graduate school, for example. And then I started really connecting hard last few months of graduate school, and then for the year after I was out, I really just focused on connecting. I'm still focusing on that, and at the same time differentiating. And so it's taken, a few years. It's about 3 years. They say there's actually been studies on this too. It takes about 5 years to reinvent yourself. The first 2 years you're going to spend really figuring out your purpose and connecting with the new industry, and then you're going to start to come into your own that 3rd and 4th year, and then by that 5th year you'll be on top or near the top of that industry again. So I think that 5-year timeline, like once you're out of grad school, once you're kind of at the end of your 20s or 30s or 40s or whatever, that 5-year timeline from what I've seen is pretty dead on. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yeah.
Most of us spend the last 5 years working on a topic, sometimes even falling in love with it. Doesn't it feel like you've been wasting your effort when you move to a completely different subject?
No, I understand that feeling too. I had that feeling when I was leaving graduate school. It was like 5 years of graduate school, I'm leaving now, what a waste. But think of everything that you've learned. A lot of what you've learned is just how to learn, like how to learn quickly, right? That's why you see a lot of people that get their degrees in, physics or biology. Biology is a great one as an example. People get their degree in, let's say, immunology, and then they'll do a postdoc in like behavioral psychology, or they'll do a postdoc in physiology, and then later on they'll end up doing a project that gets an R01 grant for, like on liver cells or some sort of cell biology that's not related. So what if you realize what your real skill set is, which is the ability to learn quickly, and this whole foundation, this knowledge base that you've learned of science, that's what you have of value. It may not be like, are you in engineering or biology? Materials? So you might be focused on this right now, but just because you're focused on this, don't forget about all the stuff that led up to that whole knowledge base. And really, it's just about thinking, zooming out, and thinking about things in a different way, and thinking about how you can leverage your skill set. And connecting will help you leverage those skills. Like you'd be surprised how few people have your skill set, right? So just start leveraging it to different industries, is what I would suggest. No, it's very valuable. And people in other industries, if you've reached up here, I mean, you're at MIT, PhD in a certain industry, they're going to know you can reach higher levels in their industry. So it's all about how you look at it. Does that answer your question? We can talk more tactically, like how practically you can do that if you want to see me after too. Yeah.
So you're suggesting that we have to adapt to the new environment?
Yeah.
How would be the best way to adapt to a new environment? Especially if the vision of the company is very different from yours. Let's say as scientists, we are more focused on data, results and publications, but how would, like as scientists, how would we fit in businesses and the other industries?
Good question. Similar to your question. So your skill set got you to where you are today, but it's not going to get you to where you want to go tomorrow. You're going to have to add to it. Okay? So you're never going to lose that skill set you have. This is for all of you, really. You're never going to lose that skill set you have. You're just going to have to add things to it. All right? So, and by some of the things you're going to have to add, you're going to have to add connecting to it. You're going to have to add a different perspective. Like you're always going to have that data mindset, that ability to do research and zero in on stuff and learn quickly. You're going to have that. But now you might need to add some interpersonal skills. Now you might need to add some business sense, meaning that, okay, I got to know why knowledge is important, like how it's applicable, not just knowledge in itself. Like how can I use that knowledge to create a product and to make profit so this company can keep going. Like, so just think about adding on to that skill set. And again, focus on what your audience, if you're interviewing for a job, what's their goal, not just what your goal is. Does that help? Yeah. Yeah. And so I'll relate it to giving a talk again. Anytime you give a talk, so her question was, do you just focus on the company's vision? In a sense, yes. Anytime you give a talk or anytime you're interacting with someone, you should be focusing on two things: purpose and audience. What purpose are you trying to achieve, and what does your audience respond to? Right? If I came in here and gave you guys a bunch of examples of, the sports industry at the beginning and how it's changing, you'd be like, what? Wouldn't make any sense. So focus on your audience and what they know and what they respond to, but then focus on your purpose too, which is to get across how you can help that company, how you're a good fit. Does that make sense? All right, thank you all. If there's any more questions, you can come see me afterwards. I appreciate you coming. Have a good day.